Hi everybody, this is Hero back with another Dragonflight video, and in this video I have made my own custom Affliction Warlock spec tree, complete with the ability to work your way through the tree, pick your points. There are choice nodes, there are passives. It's all good. I'm excited. And the reason I did this is number one, I want to contribute to the conversation about Affliction for Dragonflight. And the best way to do this, I thought, was to try to craft an entire design tree before they release the Affliction Warlock trees so that I can have a sense of designing a fully themed spec tree. And therefore, the ideas that they come up with, we can have a reasonable discussion about now and also prepare for when they release the trees to see what kinds of things are on Blizzard's mind and what offerings that we, the community, can give. Now, I know this is not necessarily going to get to Blizzard. The purpose is to just at least contribute somewhat to the conversation. So I've used something called Talent Tree Manager. I'll put the link below. I'll also put an export to this paste bin for this tree below so that you can import this and with the talent loadout editor, play with it as you like. So I'll go through all of the selections and choices I've made in this design, and then I will maybe carve out a couple of options for trees. First off, we have Corruption, which I think is the baseline piece for Affliction Warlocks. I've always thought of Affliction as being a dot spec, and Corruption is the main hinge point or anchor for the spec. Second, we have both our builder and our spender. So I want to move away from Malefic Wrath and come back to a Curse of Agony as a generator or Curse of Doom. This is kind of a choice node that I think is very interesting. And then Unstable Affliction as our main spender, and you can cast this as many times as you have soul shards, up to 5 on a single target, and it operates in that older style of just adding an individual version of Unstable Affliction on top of the target. So it counts as its own dot. Each instance of Unstable Affliction is another dot, and we'll talk about the implications of that going forward. The reason why I like the idea of a choice node here for our builder is it offers in various kinds of gameplay the opportunity to have different forms of soul shard generation. Either you have the regular bit that you'll get from Curse of Agony, and maybe you can modify that with lots of haste to get faster ticks and more soul shards, or in AoE you can have many versions of this giving you a steady stream. Or with Curse of Doom you can have something where you get either a bunch of these out and you get a number of soul shards right in a row, or you don't mind delaying your soul shard generation because you have other priorities, like maybe in PvP, or I guess in a PvE scenario where you just want one big hit from Curse of Doom going off and you get that regular instance of it over a longer period, so 20 seconds or something like that. I've also included the Doomguard flavor, which I think in the case of spreading Doom gives you a fairly reasonable opportunity to get a Doomguard, whereas in Classic, where Doom had this percentage chance, you can only have one curse active at a time, so the chance that it would proc would be very low. Anyways, I like this flavor, and we're going to play with it a little bit. So overall, our builder and spender, Unstable Affliction, and your curses are the main staples of Affliction Warlock, and I would like to retain that going forward. And then we basically modify this in a variety of ways. On the one hand, we have on our right side of the tree all of the drain related talents. So anything that's doing channeling damage or draining health is going to appear on this side of the tree and be modified as you move your way through. It's going to include options that simplify your gameplay when you're using these spells and ways to amplify their effects. And on the left side of the tree we have all of our curse themed ideas. So anything that's going to improve Curse of Agony or Curse of Doom or your utility curses, and anything that's going to offer you amplification of those kinds of effects will be on the right side. Down the middle we have cooldown oriented items, things like your like a new version of Swap Soul over here, essentially instantly granting a bunch of dots on a target. You have your Dark Glare, please pardon the icons, they're not quite in yet. And then you have some older ideas like Dark Soul Misery and Soul Conduit. These are sort of your mainstay abilities that could function along either side, the curse direction or the draining direction. So let's go through all of the talents one by one, now that you can see the major themes and the major builder-spender pieces, and we'll talk about different forms. On the far left, in our second row, we have Languish, which is a utility piece. It would make use of whatever curse you got on the class side, so Curse of Weakness, Curse of Tongues, kind of PvP oriented, but it's available early on so that if you need a point, even for a Mythic Plus dungeon, it's accessible. Then, as I said, you have this major choice between the style of Agony or the style of Doom, our main single target spender, and then we have a rendition of Nightfall that I think is appropriate for this spec. Now, Nightfall historically has made your Shadow Bolt instant cast. And this is true in the current version. It was true in Classic as well, that your corruption damage would tick and give you a chance to proc Nightfall as a free instant cast. I want to get away from that. I think it's better to have corruption and Shadow Bolt being paired together in a slightly different way. So what this says is you get increased corruption damage, and your Shadow Bolt's going to get increased damage based on however much corruption is on the target. So if you have a max corruption, it'll have it's at its highest moment, your Shadow Bolts are going to do more damage because it's going to do 10% of whatever is remaining on the target. I think this is a better way to go forward, and instead of making an instant cast, what we're going to do is reduce the cast time, like in the old classic Destruction Warlock tree, improving your Shadow Bolt's cast time. This makes sure that your filler is not just a bunch of more instant cast pieces. Rather, your filler with Shadow Bolt is still a casted spell. I think this is important because much of Affliction's gameplay is already spinning dots out. So if you want to go heavily into all kinds of dots, you can get your Agony, Corruption, Unstable Affliction. You can get other kinds of dots here in the tree as well. And then keeping those up on multiple targets means that your filler has to be this weird Nightfall instant cast that you get, and then you want to use up the proc, because if you don't use up the proc, then you're wasting it. I think it's better just to move your filler to something that's going to gain damage because you're keeping your dots on your targets, but it doesn't directly mess with the order of your spells. So we'll see that going forward and how that plays out, but essentially Nightfall giving some interaction between your filler Shadow Bolt and Corruption early on. Then we have Siphon Life, which is another dot, and it's going to be the marquee piece for all of the drain spells, so they flow from it. So we have it up here. Again, it does a little bit more damage than it does on Live. We want our dots to be powerful or potent for Affliction Warlocks. Next row, row 3, we have Torment, which is Agony and Doom or Curse related, giving your chance for Agony and Doom, not a chance, excuse me, every time they tick, they're going to increase the duration of corruption on your target. I think this is really valuable because as you move through the trees, what you want to see is that the new talents you pick up help to enhance the gameplay that you've chosen. And the best way to enhance it is to make it so it's easier to maintain the gameplay style that you'd like. Torment is indexing into the curse side of that. So while Agony is ticking away, it's also making sure that your corruption is going to stay on the target so that you can do other things like put up more dots or drain or get into some other curse ideas over here. So I like this idea. It's a one-off, you don't have to take it, but it does pass through over here. Amplify Curse, which is an old classic idea of improving the effectiveness of a curse on a timer. This allows you to do it either for Curse of Agony or Curse of Doom on the damage side, or you can do it for a non-damaging curse and increase the effectiveness of something like Tongues or Weakness even more if you want it for a PvP idea. The flavor is what's going to divide your use of Agony or Doom. Agony, when it's under Amplify Curse, and this again will not be able to be pandemicked, but for the duration of that curse, it'll allow it to ticks to automatically give you a soul shard, so it's giving you a little bit of a burst intake. Whereas Doom is going to guarantee that you get a Doom Guard. So The idea here is to offer the player a significant choice for this kind of burst spell. Black and Soul versus Pandemonium. The idea here is to offer back to Affliction Warlock an easy and reasonable way to swap your dots or get priority damage on a target. Currently, it's difficult. You have to ramp up your Agony if you have to swap targets. Affliction is one of the worst specs to do it. And this is one of two ways to mitigate against that and give you an option, if you want it, to be able to instantly apply all of your major dots onto a target. And this would include both Agony and Doom, even if you've chosen one or the other. So what Black and Soul is doing is doubling down on that gameplay. And we'll see that a little bit later in the spec tree as well, that we want to give options for Agony and Doom to coexist in certain instances. Pandemonium, if you don't want that ability to swap and you don't care, this is kind of your ability to pandemic all of your active dots on every single target on a 2-minute CD for 6 seconds, like just extending them all. So this is kind of like a smaller version of Dark Glare on a 2-minute CD, and it doesn't come with the benefit of this huge, monstrous, horrible demon that does a bunch of damage based on it. So Dark Glare is being moved to a giant CD, and we have a smaller version of it in Pandemonium if you want it. I think it's really good flavor. It synergizes nicely with the kinds of effects that Affliction wants to do in a multi-target scenario. Then we move over here back to the Drain side, and we're forcing people to choose between one of two channeled abilities, either Drain Soul or Drain Life. And the idea here is that Drain Life casts quicker and it restores health to you, so it's a 4-second cast, but it does less damage. And Drain Soul is a longer cast, does more damage, has the ability to generate soul shards when it kills something, or if the target dies, so you can snipe for soul shards, and it has an execute profile. So this choice, I think, is going to be fundamental going forward. And I like the idea that on PvP, maybe you prefer one or the other. In PvE, depending on the kind of content you're doing, if you need execute, if you don't, if you want to amplify healing and survivability, you can make this choice. And all of the stuff that flows down from the tree will interact with both of these, kind of like the choice between Curse of Agony and Curse of Doom. The next row, in our fourth row, and here we are getting to our first breakpoint, so you have to have selected 8 points in the talent loadout to get to this point. And again, here we can choose by holding control to go back and forth between these two. So we have to get 8 points in order to gain access to this portion. You can see maybe if we don't want any of the drain stuff, we can ignore it entirely. If we would prefer not to do the curse stuff, we could have gone over here to the drain instead. That makes sense. But the main pieces you're still going to want to pick up, just like in the other trees. Okay, so our first piece is a bit of a defensive related bit. This is you take 5% less damage from targets you have cursed. This is excellent overall, but it's also just 1 point, and it is a bit of a gateway to the curse side, but I think this is reasonable. Some of the other specs have through points that aren't really good, or they feel bad, or they're restrictive, and the goal here is not to do that necessarily. You can still gain access through Vile Taint to some of these bottom pieces that are related to curses, so you don't have to take this one, but it also makes sense to me that we offer the player some sort of damage reduction from a Warlock's perspective for choosing to do the curse side of the tree rather than the life gain side of the tree. So this works in AoE. If you're multi-dotting, every target that you have a curse on will do less damage to you. Then we have the middle section, which includes a few options for AoE. We have Vile Taint, which is its current form. It's a 20-second CD that uses a soul shard to put a huge dot on all the targets. This is pretty cool. We used to have to take Sow the Seed instead of Vile Taint, but we've gotten rid of Sow the Seed, and instead you just have your baseline Seed of Corruption. And the reason why we are getting rid of it is we're buffing the spell power coefficient to 65%, and we are getting rid of Malefic Rapture, which was your other way to spend soul shards that did a bunch of damage based on all of the dots on all of the targets. So I think we should get away from Malefic Rapture, which basically just duplicates your Seed of Corruption's functionality, except it just extends your dots, which is kind of lazy in my view. The whole skill set for Affliction Warlock is going to be maintaining these dots. Seed of Corruption should just be a baseline effect, and you should be able to use it alongside Vile Taint. So these are your ways to do major AoE damage by spending soul shards in a regular fashion. And they're both available here early on in the tree so that you can make your choice. If you want to avoid them altogether, you can do so and still gain access to every single other tool. But here they are for your purposes. Then we have a little bit more of the Shadow Bolt interactions that I was talking about. So building on your corruption interaction with Shadow Bolt, we get a little bit more Shadow Bolt damage. Again, if you don't want to cast any Shadow Bolts because you really want to do drain stuff and a little bit of curse stuff, you can avoid this altogether, but it is a piece that's related. On the drain side, a couple of interactions. A change to Inevitable Demise. So Inevitable Demise used to be related to Agony ticks. And what we're doing is we're modifying it to make it interact with the drain side of the tree. So corruption damage, again, tying it back to the main piece, as well as siphon life damage is going to increase the damage of your next drain spell by whatever percent. And this can stack up to 50%. What this does is this introduces the ability to hold off on using your drain spells as a filler and instead allow these abilities to stack up in AoE. They will stack up really fast, and then using them when you hit that 50% threshold. That means that Shadow Bolt can be used as your main filler, or you can just do a lot of multi-dotting in order to get this effect, and then use your drain spells more periodically instead. But it works with both your Drain Soul and your Drain Life. In Execute, this is some really serious damage if you're playing Drain Soul. You can always tune the numbers here, but this is the idea, moving it away from being related to your Curse of Agony and tying it back into the drain side. Also on the drain side, a new idea that's related to Blackened Soul and goes back to the old sense of Affliction. It's a modification of the Soul Swap ability. So Soul Swap used to be an instant cast button. You would have all your dots on a target, you would press Soul Swap, and then you'd fire it off onto another target over here. You'd retain the first set of dots, and you just transfer whatever level of the dot is onto a new target as an instant cast. It's a way for Affliction to reasonably maintain the buildup, especially of Agony, and move it over to a new target at its current effectiveness. And what I'd like to do is retain that, but make the player work for it a little bit more. So here's what it says. When you fully channel Drain Life or Drain Soul, and remember, Drain Life has a lower channel time than Drain Soul, so it's harder to do with Drain Soul. All of your damage over time effects on the target are stored for 10 seconds. The next time you cast Drain Life or Drain Soul, release the stored effects onto whichever target you're casting it on. So remember, in a world where you can stack up unstable afflictions on a target, you could have Doom, Agony, Corruption, Siphon Life, and 3 unstable afflictions. You can drain the soul of this target and get a snapshot of whatever those buffs are, and then you could soul swap them over to another target. You can do something like Blacken Soul into 3 unstable afflictions, and then save it or soul swap it by pressing Drain Life or Drain Soul, and grab a copy of all of those, and then move it over to another target if you want, or save it for when those go off, or if a target's going to become immune for a few seconds due to some mechanic, you can save them in whatever state they're in and use them later. I think this is like really cool gameplay for Affliction. Managing their dots, thinking about it, but having to use this spell specifically to make it happen. I really love this flavor, and my appeal to Blizzard would be to bring back Soul Swap in some kind of version. It need not be this one, but I think tying it to the drain spells or your channeled spells is the best way to do it. So what we have here is a 3-point node, and the goal of this node is to say, hey, if you'd like to index into this at all, we'll give it to you as a 2-minute cooldown. And so maybe in PvP you need this more often, whereas in a raid you don't. Maybe in Mythic Plus you want this for a specific encounter or once or twice, but you don't want it all the time. You take 1 or 2 ticks at this, 2 minutes, 1 minute, or if you want it all the time, you can invest in for a 30-second CD. Pretty cool stuff in my view. Phantom Singularity, again, maintaining that drain. We've buffed it a little bit, so it's 40% spell power and 50% of the healing, so it maintains that flavor of being a healing spell related to your kit, again, draining the life of all of the targets. It also complements your Vile Taint and Seed of Corruption casts as well, because it does not cost any soul shards, but is still a dot on the target. So it's another way to get another dot on your target, but it is AoE related, but it is not as centrally AoE focused as the soul shard spenders are. Then we move down here, still in the 8-point section, we have Curse of Exhaustion, again building up on the PvP side, but still curse related, and something that you could amplify with your curses if you wanted to in a PvP setting, reducing the movement speed of some character. This is the sort of thing that is niche, but I think belongs as a one-pointer, and it doesn't require too much to gain access to it. If you were working your way down the curse side of the tree and you wanted to grab it, or if you didn't really care much about curses in general, but you wanted the utility side, you could, on the loadout, just come here on the language side. You can skip out on most of the curse-related things, but still gain access to this Curse of Exhaustion. Malediction. This spell increases the crit chance of your curses by 2%, so just your curses. And when they deal damage to a target in Execute, you and your party members deal 12% more critical damage for 8 seconds. Now the goal here is to offer players both a party buff that they can bring that is somewhat reasonable, and critical damage is not really the best kind of party buff to offer, but it can, in certain circumstances, be very valuable. But it also is something that the player can make use of. It does feed into a very specific kind of idea at the end of the tree, and is not something that's too much of an impediment. So I think this is the right kind of tuning for this. Not the numbers necessarily, but this idea of having both a benefit to the player, crit on a specific type of spell that you want to be doing, your curses, and offering crit-related modifiers for a party instead of an entire raid. So a bit of raid utility for Affliction here if we wanted it. Rolling Agony, again related to the curses, this goes both ways. So if you're using Agony, you want a longer duration because it can stack and stay at that higher stack for a lot longer without you having to refresh it. But for Doom, we would prefer to make the period shorter. So we want more haste, and this one says your Doom lasts longer before it goes off. So this means you're getting more procs of Doom. It's, again, building into the type of theme that you've chosen as a player, whether to go for a longer Doom that you can now modify down, or make your Agony tick happen more often, or you're giving you more soul shards so that you want Agony to be something that you don't have to refresh all the time. Then we get our main spell, Dark Glare. Dark Glare has been modified in a couple of ways. Number one, its spell damage is way up, so I made it a 5-minute cooldown. Huge button to press for Affliction. It's going to do the same thing as our Pandemonium by extending our dots, but the nice part here is that the Dark Glare itself will be strong. And this is one of the main problems that Affliction has had, is balancing what Dark Glare should be doing. Is it just a dot extender, which basically it is right now? It doesn't do very much damage. It just facilitates Malefic Rapture, essentially. Here, in a version where Unstable Afflictions can be stacked up, this will extend all of them on the target, and the damage of this creature is going to go way up, both in single target and especially in multi-target. If you need to funnel damage into a target, Dark Glare is going to be awesome because of this scaling that you get from its secondary effect. Eradication, sticking with a bit of the haste theme for having dots up, which we get in a few places. This is also building off of both our corruption and unstable affliction. So we have the pathing here from Seed of Corruption through unstable affliction. We also have the pathing through corruption related talents from Nightfall down. And then if you really didn't want to have anything to do with Shadow Bolts and you didn't need the AoE from Seed of Corruption, you gain access to it from the drain side of the tree, which does have some interactions, as you saw, with corruption as well. So we're trying to make eradication very accessible but thematically related to the unstable affliction and corruption side rather than the curse side. So if you have these dots up, you have a chance to gain haste in your kit, which is pretty good for affliction in general. Maybe this is tuned too high, but it's a choice that's available in the center portion. And then back on the drain side, Siphon Life, Drain Soul, Phantom Singularity. All of these deal 10% more damage and restore 15% more life. And you have this as a 2-pointer to move you down into the bottom of the drain side. Just amplifying your choice to stay this far down in the tree with a nice little payoff here. And the part of the feature here is you want to make your drain stuff feel substantial on the life gain side. It's kind of, especially something like Phantom Singularity, it doesn't feel very impactful in that way. So if you want to index into it, you have access to it here. Now we get to the 20 line, and below here are one of our main payoffs for getting down into the curse side of the tree is Impending Catastrophe, which has been modified a little bit. It's that giant wave of anima that goes out for Venthyr warlocks. And here's what we've done. We've made this cost 2 soul shards, so you have to spend 2 soul shards to do it. It's a 1-minute CD and has a 2-second cast. So this is going to be something in an AoE environment where you wait for it and you plan to cast this on a 1-minute CD in big pulls or on an AoE fight in raid. And it has a lot of features. Number one, the spell damage is up from the current bit because we've added a soul shard requirement. This is also going to put all kinds of curses on the target. It'll put weakness if it's a weakness character. It'll put tongues if it's a caster. It'll put agony and doom on the target, so both. Doesn't matter if you've chosen it or not, it'll put both. And then it'll do the same kind of damage going through the targets that we're used to seeing on live. I think it's nice for a major capstone piece in the tree to offer access to thematically related ideas that are then dovetailed together. So if you made a choice up here and you're planning to play with Agony or play with Doom, at the bottom you're rewarded with a doubling down on both. So if you want Impending Catastrophe, there's a cost to it. 1-minute CD, 2 soul shards, but the payoff is very high, putting all of these dots out on all of these targets. This is going to ramp up your soul shard generation like crazy. This is going to put a bunch of damage onto all these targets. This is going to help you to funnel your attention as an Affliction Warlock, because you know you can put an Impending Catastrophe out every minute and you don't have to worry about multi-dotting. So this solves a lot of problems, but it's still kind of costly if you want to stick with it, because there's other really interesting options for functionality in the kit elsewhere. Then we have our main CD choice between Dark Soul Misery or Soul Conduit. This is currently a choice on live, and I think it's an appropriate one to divide your approach between kind of consistently giving you more soul shards by refunding the ones that you spend versus Dark Soul Misery giving you a burst of on a 2-minute CD that lines up with other CDs as well. So things like Blackened Soul or Pandemonium are going to line up with Dark Soul Misery, and as we'll see in a minute with Corrupting Lair, you'll probably get Dark Lair to line up with Dark Soul Misery as well, so you can have that burst profile if you would prefer to have it. This is decoupled from any parents, so we saw this I think in the priest tree maybe it's Disc Priest. When you get down to the 20 mark, there's one opening. There's a few trees that are like this. This has no prerequisites, essentially. So once you fill out the tree, no matter what you filled out, you can gain access to this central piece. And I think this is reasonable given how central this cooldown is, or soul conduit is, to the functionality of either the curse side of the tree or the drain side of the tree. So I want it to be free from prerequisites. Corrupting Leer is a conduit that I've reimagined here, reducing the cooldown of a 5-minute CD by 0.5 seconds, and this could be tuned to 2.25, whatever is relevant, whenever you critically strike with a damage over time effect. So damage over time effects include all of your dots and as well as your drains. It does not include your Shadow Bolt. But the idea here is if you have indexed into critical strike or you have high crit, then you are going to gain access to Dark Glare more often, which I think is kind of cool. So this also pairs nicely with something like Malediction if you wanted the curse side of it and still making use of Corrupting Leer. If you are doing AoE, you're going to get more access to Dark Glare more often, and the Dark Glare is going to do more damage because it has a higher damage floor at 75% spell power, plus the 10% for every dot on all the targets. So it's going to be a better way to funnel. If you have a huge AoE scenario and you pick Corrupting Leer, you now have a really reasonable funnel. Malefic Wrath. I've reimagined this. This was related to Malefic Rapture, so you would cast 3 Malefic Raptures and it makes your Shadow Bolt do 35% damage per stack. Here, instead, we're tying it back to the Drain spells, so Drain Life and Drain Soul. When they deal damage, they increase the damage of your next Shadow Bolt by 15% for 15 seconds, stacking up to 3 times. I think the duration of Malefic Wrath is not high enough on live, so it's 10 seconds, so you have to cast a Rapture every 10 seconds in order to maintain the buff. And in certain kinds of content, you just get CC'd, or you have to do a mechanic, or in Mythic Plus you have to run away from something, or you're moving between packs. It's difficult to maintain that buff. So I think setting it at 15 seconds is probably right. It also, for a spell that's tied to drain spells, like Drain Life and Drain Soul, is appropriate that you have, if you have a longer cast time, then the duration of the buff that you receive, which is based on that channel, is going to be longer so that you can actually make sure you channel it in time. But the point would be that whenever they tick, so the first tick of Drain Life or the first tick of Drain Soul would be good enough to give you one of the stacks, and then you can just do a maintenance buff. So if you really cared more about Shadow Bolt casts and you just needed in a second to keep the buff up, all you have to do is fire off a Drain Life or a Drain Soul, get the 1 tick, and it maintains the buff. So it's not quite so onerous, but there is that wee leeway. Also, we've reduced the damage profile of it, so the legendary effect is something like 35% per stack. I think given some of the other ideas in this spec, particularly Unstable Affliction stacking, bringing that power level down is probably appropriate. Okay, then we move into the secondary tier of this final piece with Profane Insight on the curse side. This says that the global cooldown of your curses is reduced by 0.25 seconds or 0.5 seconds. Now this is also up for tuning, I think, in my view. I had kicked around the idea of something like a final capstone making your curses not be on the global cooldown, but I think that's not quite appropriate, especially in Mythic Plus and PvP. But this is a similar idea. So when you cast certain spells in the game, you incur different levels of global cooldown. Usually it's like 1.5 seconds, and then that is modified by haste. But certain spells only kick in a portion of that 1.5 second cooldown so that you can do an action earlier than you normally would. And that goes from things being off the global CD, like Fire Blasts or Fire Mages, which you can cast while you're pressing another button, to things like Totems and Wind Shear, I believe, which have a slightly reduced global cooldown penalty. This is what this is doing for curses. So instead of it being a whole global cooldown, 1.5 seconds, hasted, for curses, it would make it slightly less. So you can get your curses out more often if you're multi-dotting, or they're not as much of a penalty to you if you're doing it in single target to refresh them. I like this idea. It seems kind of subtle, but to me, it has the potential to be very powerful in certain circumstances. Then we have another curse-related piece. When Curse of Agony generates a soul shard, you gain a stack of rotting souls. When Curse of Doom generates a soul shard, you gain 5 stacks, and then each stack is granting you 1% increased intellect for 10 seconds, stacking up to 10 times. So this is just a nice payoff that you get for indexing into curses. And then depending on what you have here, if you are using Blackened Soul to give yourself multiple dots, if you're using Impending Catastrophe to have both Agony and Doom out on the target, then you're going to get more value out of Rotting Souls and make sure that those stacks go up. So part of the payoff here is in multi-target effects. Having multiple Dooms is going to quickly give you access to this 1% stack. But there's a problem here of it falling off if your Doom ticks are too far apart, meaning that you get 5 stacks, yes, but those stacks might fall off if your Doom is not ticking fast enough, whereas Agony is going to guarantee that you get these stacks all the way along. Anyways, just another interesting payoff piece. Then we go into the center of the tree, which is going to be divided up and accessible by picking Soul Conduit or Dark Soul. And there's a couple of versions of this. There's the straight center, which is directly related to this. One of these is more cleave oriented or AoE oriented, and one of these is more single target oriented. So Haunt is going to be similar to what it is now. It's another dot on the target, which is going to do damage over time and count as a dot. It is going to increase your damage dealt to the target by 10%, so just like Unstable Affliction. And if the target dies, you get a reset. And then we are pairing that together. I'll come back to this. So that's one track off of this. Instability says Unstable Affliction also affects an additional enemy within 15 yards of your target. So this is giving you a cleave profile to Unstable Affliction, which is a very, very, very powerful effect in Mythic Plus and in cleave or council fights in Raid if you can stack the targets together. Otherwise, instability is not quite as valuable because if you have a council fight where there's spread cleave, you don't get as much value out of it. But in Mythic Plus, it's also really good. You can tab target, or you can just hit Unstable Affliction a number of times, maybe 3 or 4 times, if you have a 2-target scenario instead of firing off a bunch of Seeds of Corruption, and you still get value on multiple targets. So it's giving you back a stronger version of the 2-target cleave through spreading Unstable Afflictions. It is out of your control though, so if you're a PvP player and you have a CC target and it's within 15 yards and you take instability, your Unstable Affliction might also go on them. Then we have Withering Bolt. Withering Bolt is tying back into the Drain side, which does have some interactions with Shadow Bolt, so that's why it's there. But it's also, if you didn't want all these Drain effects, you could still gain access to it by doing the main piece, Dark Soul Misery and Soul Conduit. Withering Bolt says Shadow Bolt deals 10% X% more damage for each damage over time effect you have on the target. This is a conduit that got nerfed significantly in the game, and it made me sad because I like the idea of your Decimating Bolt, Shadow Bolts that we currently have for Necrolord, stacking up a bunch of damage over time effects and then having huge burst. But we've kind of brought this down to the lower end of the scaling at 10% because you could potentially have access to a lot of dots on target. 3 or 4 Unstable Afflictions, Siphon Life, Phantom Singularity, Curse of Agony or Doom, and then there's another one over here, Curse of Longing. You can have Corruption, and you can get these out on the target pretty quickly with something like Blackened Soul or your Soul Swap. So Withering Bolt has the potential to be a really, really strong filler spell that you can gain access to if you're improving your Shadow Bolt play and getting lots of haste through Eradication. But I think this is a nice kind of niche profile that you can pursue if you want it. If you're spending most of your time filling with Drain Lives and Drain Souls because you've amplified those, then maybe you don't care so much about Withering Bolt. And then Claw of Endereth. This is a take on one of the legendary effects that we have. Basically, just paring this down into 2 pieces. Drain Life and Drain Soul now channel 50% faster or 100% faster. On the live game, it only applies to Drain Life. and it's kind of useless outside of niche ideas in PvE. It's pretty strong in PvP. If you played Affliction Warlock and watched, I think people like Maldiva play Afflock, you can see how fast these drain lives go off during soul rots, and it's a ton of damage going out. But I like the idea of giving access to this gameplay as a capstone idea for the drain side, just again amplifying and really multiplying the payoff for having spent your points coming down through here. Notice that drain life, if it's 100% faster, would be a 2-second baseline cast. Drain soul, a 2.5-second baseline cast. Think about how that all works together with things like soul swap, that works together with things like inevitable demise, that works together with things like shadow mastery. All of this stuff, I think, is capped off nicely by just an increase in the speed at which you can perform all of these things. Finally, the major capstone pieces. Curse of Longing, so introducing a third curse that has a damage profile to the spec. So not only can, through Blackened Soul, you have multiple curses up, or if you have Impending Catastrophe, Doom, and Agony, but now you can have a third one. This one is going to have a limitation to 1 total curse. This is kind of back to that old classic flavor, and it's going to have a huge profile. First of all, it's going to inflict 200% spell power over 30 seconds. If you compare that to Doom, 175% over 20 seconds, that's pretty reasonable. But here's the thing, is Curse of Longing is going to gain access to all the good things like Amplify Curse. It's going to get Curse crit % chance. It's going to have, reduced global cooldown. It's going to, there's one other interaction. I guess Otherworldly Embrace also works, but in any case, it'll get some of that amplification. And then the key takeaway is, like the mastery for Resto Druids, for what spells it? Nourish, I think. It gains triple the bonus from your mastery. So having many hots up makes that single target heal really powerful. That's a whole gameplay style. Curse of Longing is the same idea, but on the curse side for Affliction Warlock. So you receive triple bonus from your mastery potent afflictions, which is going to buff all of your dot damage, essentially. So any kind of channeling damage, any kind of dot damage, your potent affliction is going to amplify it. So if you have high mastery, you can think about indexing into Curse of Longing to give yourself a really, really big single target dot. Still in the single target vein, we have a choice between Deathbolt, which is the traditional version of this, where you take a portion of whatever damage over time effects are on the target, and you create a new dot. And you have this giant bolt that goes out and hits the target on a 30-second CD, and it takes all the remaining damage on that target, and it does a 3-second dot. So again, technically another dot. What Deathbolt is doing, which can amplify things like Withering Bolt, but it's this 30-second CD. It pairs nicely with things like Blackened Soul and Soul Swap. If you want to do this, you can immediately swap over and then capture the target damage with Deathbolt. Really cool profile that I think is useful for Affliction to think about, moving their dots around, getting a big payoff with Deathbolt. And then Eerie Possession. If you don't want something that's more bursty or oriented around CDs and appropriate natures of CDs, we can make Haunt permanent. So this gives it the Unending Corruption version, which is a talent, I think, in the 30 row for Affliction Warlocks, which made Corruption permanent on the target. I don't like that so much because Corruption's like our main dot. So to make it permanent, actually, it's not a bad thing, but I prefer to have Haunt be the big payoff for that sort of gameplay, that your 10% bonus damage over time on the target is a singular piece. It makes Haunt permanent on the target, so you don't have to worry about pressing it if you would like to simplify your gameplay, and maybe you're in a raid boss where you have to move a lot, so having Haunt on the target is just a guaranteed extra dot on that target. That, for me, is the better target design for something like Unending Corruption, and I've given it to you in Eerie Possession. It's also going to make Haunt slightly better, so it increases not by 10%, but it's 15%. Then we have, as a finisher for this cleave idea in Unstable Affliction, Cascading Grief, while your UA, your Corruption, and your Agony or Doom are all present on at least 3 targets, your haste is increased by 10%. So this is your cleave or AoE payoff for having this buff up on all the targets. Again, it's not full AoE like with Seed of Corruption, where you probably would prefer, maybe you wouldn't even prefer to take instability, but if you have 2 or 3 target cleave, you have a giant payoff in huge haste amp. And then on the drain side of the tree, Everlasting Affliction. Your Drain Life, Drain Soul, and Shadow Bolt spells have a 50% chance to reset the duration of Corruption and Siphon Life spells on the target. And then this is a 2-pointer, so if you just want to, if you're casting a lot of these spells to the point where on a single target, you're always going to reset it because of the damage of these spells is constantly doing it. Maybe you only need 1 tick of this. But if you want to be sure that the damage always resets it, because it's really important to your gameplay, then you can take both and get 100% value. And the purpose of this, as I mentioned earlier, is in part to simplify the tree that you've chosen. If you've chosen to go down the drain side and play with Shadow Bolt and then fill with Drain Life, Drain Soul, then part of the payoff needs to be that you can do that and not have to spend all of your time refreshing your single target dots or whatever you're doing, that there's a nice payoff to that gameplay. Similarly, on the other side, things like Haunt, right? Giving access to Eerie Possession is helping to streamline that gameplay if you would prefer to get the value out of it, but you don't want to make it overly disruptive to your rotation. Okay, so I know that took a while. That's the overall tree. Let me head over to the loadout editor so that you can see what some of the takeaways are for putting your points in. And I'll just go down the curse side of the tree first so you can see if I only wanted curse things, what's the takeaway for how much I have to do. Say I want Languish even. What do I have to take in order to gain access to these other pieces? You can see you don't even have to take Siphon Life if you don't want to. You can avoid the Shadow Bolt stuff. You can come down here and get Dark Glare. What if you want like no AoE? How far can we go without taking any AoE nodes and just taking the curse side? Well, this is what you get. Now, if you don't want Vile Taint, if you don't want Seed of Corruption, you need to index into either Siphon Life and some of the drain stuff, or give yourself more Shadow Bolt scaling and corruption damage. So let's grab some of the drain stuff, and maybe we want Soul Swap here, and another dot, because we think the dots are going to be good. This is how far you have to go in order to gain access to the bottom of the tree on the curse side. You can see what are we missing? Improved Shadow Bolt, Seed of Corruption, Vile Taint. We're missing Haste from Eradication. We're missing Inevitable Demise. A lot of other pieces are here. We don't have Nightfall. This seems to me a reasonable version of a tree where there's good payoff, but you have to give up some good choices. So now we can grab all the other curse stuff over here, and we can start to grab our, let's get Dark Soul Misery instead. And now we are at the bottom of the tree. We've picked up our main synergies on the curse side of the tree. What other things do we want? So what is our profile? We have really no Shadow Bolt scaling at the moment, so maybe we're going to avoid Withering Bolt and Everlasting Affliction. So that puts us in here. Do we want Cleave? Do we want Duration on our Corrupting Leer? Let's take Haunt. Maybe we're going to do some Death Bolt stuff because we have these dots, but we want to get value on having the dots there. And then I guess we'll take reduction on the Gargoyle, and we'll get to, oh, we can't do that. So we have 30 points spent now. So maybe we have to make a choice between Corrupting Leer over here and Cascading Grief if we're doing Cleave. Or maybe we come back up here and we just get a bit of corruption damage because we don't care about the Cleave side of Unstable Affliction. So you can see here we're at our 30-point limit, and we have basically the same profile as many of the other spec trees. We have to make some kind of choice between the bottom nodes, and it's a fairly reasonable choice on the whole. Maybe we can get rid of this. Like, we don't actually need to cool down Dark Glare we'll just get more corruption damage. So we have corruption stuff. We have our curses. We got a huge curse here in Cursive Longing. We have some CC if we wanted it. If we didn't want Cursive Exhaustion and Languish, we could have gone down here. Lots of cool options, guys. The point is, it seems like a reasonable tree to me. What if we did, instead, something more AoE oriented? So we want Impending Catastrophe. We'll get rid of some of these other curse ideas here. But we'll get Seed of Corruption. We will get Soul Swap and Phantom Singularity for AoE type stuff. We don't mind Malediction, Impending Catastrophe. We'll keep Dark Soul. Here's some Cleave for us on this side. We don't care about the single target from Haunt and Deathbolt, but we would love Rotting Souls because we have a lot of these dots out. We're going to go with Corrupting Leer because we're going to have lots of dots out, so we'll get access to this many, many times. We can probably do Inevitable Demise because we're stacking lots of dots in AoE, so we're going to get this all the time. And maybe we'll go Drain Soul because we can snipe, and we'll have more execute opportunity in AoE. So we have 2 more points here. Do we need Nightfall? Probably not. What about some of these options over here? More damage on our funnel. Longer duration. Maybe we'll do longer duration for our agonies in AoE. And then maybe a little bit of damage over here. Oh, that we're over by 1. We got to take a couple of these points out. So we have 1 more point left to spend. You can see here, guys, there's some legitimate choices when I'm thinking about doing a AoE build. Here it is. If we're doing AoE with a little bit of funnel, so we have Seed, we have Vile Taint, we have Phantom Singularity, we get the CDR from Dark Glare, we have a Burst CD, we have Impending Catastrophe for big AoE. Now we want to funnel the damage through Drain Soul. So we're going to get these stacks from Inevitable Demise, and now with our 30th point, we'll get a 50% faster channel. So we're partly indexing into some of that funnel damage. You can see how that also plays out. I had a lot of fun making this, guys. I think there's a lot of options when you make your own tree and you think about the kind of choices that Blizzard has to make about what's important to a spec, what thematically makes sense. The point here is it's hard to do, and it's important for us understanding how to communicate good feedback to Blizzard. So access to a tool like Talent Tree Manager gives you a broader perspective when you try to make it yourself. I like this tree design. I like that it's thematically flowing nicely. Some of these things might be overpowered. You can always tune them. That's not the point. The point is functionality. What do you want Affliction to have as a spec? What kinds of themes do you think are important to the gameplay? Do you like Malefic Rapture? Or do you want it to go back to an unstable Affliction style? Let me know in the comments, guys. Or go down there below, grab Talent Tree Manager, load up the paste bin for this spec, and you can tell me what kind of build you came up with. Maybe there's some problems in this build that I haven't seen, and we can keep the conversation going. Thanks so much for watching, and we'll catch you guys again next time.